I came home after a 26-hour nursing shift and found a second fridge in the kitchen. My son's wife said, "That's mine. From now on, buy your own food." She labeled everything I bought with her name, forgetting they were living rent-free. I prepared a surprise that made them wake up crying. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My legs felt like concrete as I fumbled with my keys at the front door. 26 hours. That's how long I'd been on my feet at the hospital, dealing with back-to-back emergency surgeries and a staffing shortage that left our unit completely overwhelmed. At 66, these marathon shifts shouldn't still be part of my routine, but nursing is all I've ever known, and the bills don't stop coming just because my bones ache more than they used to. The house was unusually quiet when I stepped inside. Usually, I could hear the television blaring from the living room or Thalia's voice echoing through the halls as she talked on her phone. My son Desmond had moved back in with his wife 6 months ago after he lost his job at the marketing firm. "Just temporary, Mom," he'd said, that apologetic smile I remembered from his childhood spreading across his face. "Just until we get back on our feet." I set my purse down on the small table by the entrance and kicked off my white nursing shoes, feeling immediate relief as my swollen feet touched the cool hardwood floor. The familiar scent of my lavender air freshener mixed with something else, something that didn't belong. A sharp, chemical smell I couldn't quite place. Walking toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water before collapsing into bed, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, pressed against the far wall where my small breakfast table used to be, sat a massive stainless steel refrigerator. Not just any refrigerator, a double-door monster that looked like it belonged in a restaurant kitchen. I blinked hard, wondering if exhaustion was making me hallucinate. But no, it was real. Chrome handles gleamed under the kitchen lights, and I could hear the low hum of its motor. My original refrigerator, the modest white one I'd bought 3 years ago, had been pushed into the corner like an afterthought. What on earth? I whispered to myself, approaching the new appliance like it might bite me. "Oh good, you're home." Thalia's voice came from behind me, cool and matter-of-fact. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, perfectly put together despite it being nearly midnight. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore one of those expensive athleisure outfits that cost more than I made in a week. "Thalia, what is this?" I gestured toward the refrigerator, confusion making my voice shake slightly. She walked past me and opened the massive doors with a flourish. The interior was completely stocked: organic vegetables, premium meats, imported cheeses, bottles of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everything was organized with military precision. "This is mine," she said simply, running her manicured finger along one of the shelves. "From now on, you'll need to buy your own food." The words hit me like a physical slap. I gripped the edge of my old refrigerator for support, staring at her in disbelief. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Thalia turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I'd never noticed before. Something cold, calculating. "I said this is my refrigerator, Estelle. For my food. You'll need to make other arrangements for your groceries." She opened my old refrigerator and began pulling out items. The milk I'd bought 2 days ago. The leftover casserole I'd been looking forward to for dinner tomorrow. Even the bottle of orange juice I kept for my morning routine. Each item disappeared into her hands as she examined the labels. "Actually," she continued, her tone becoming even more businesslike, "most of this will need to go. I've already marked everything with my name." She held up a roll of small white stickers, the kind you might use for a yard sale. "See? This way there won't be any confusion about what belongs to whom." I watched in stunned silence as she methodically placed stickers on items I had purchased with my own money, in my own house, for my own consumption. The yogurt I ate every morning for breakfast, the sandwich meat I packed for lunch, even the butter I used for cooking. "Thalia, this is my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my food." She paused in her labeling and looked at me with what could only be described as pity. "Oh, Estelle, I know this might be hard to understand, but Desmond and I have been talking, and we think it's time for some new arrangements around here. More organized arrangements. The way she said my name, like I was a child who needed things explained in simple terms, sent a chill down my spine. This was the same woman who had smiled sweetly at me for months, who had thanked me repeatedly for letting them stay in my home, who had hugged me just last week and called me the best mother-in-law ever. "Where's Desmond?" I asked, looking around the kitchen as if my son might materialize to explain this bizarre situation. "He's sleeping. He has that early meeting tomorrow with the potential employer I found for him." She finished with the yogurt container and moved on to my package of English muffins. "He really needs his rest, so I'd appreciate it if you could keep the noise down. Keep the noise down, in my own house, after working a 26-hour shift to help keep the roof over all our heads." I stood there, swaying slightly from exhaustion and shock, watching this woman, this stranger who had somehow replaced the grateful daughter-in-law I thought I knew, systematically claim ownership of my groceries. Each small white sticker felt like a tiny act of war. "I don't understand," I finally managed to say. "What's happening here?" Thalia closed the refrigerator door and turned to face me fully. In the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen, her features looked sharper than I remembered, more angular. "What's happening is that we're all adults here, and adults have boundaries. This is mine." She patted the big refrigerator. "And that's yours." She nodded toward my old refrigerator, now pushed into the corner like a punishment. "But I paid for everything in there," I protested weakly. "And now I'm taking responsibility for the household food budget," she replied smoothly. "It's actually better this way, don't you think? Less confusion, less mixing of resources. Less mixing of resources. As if my 40 years of steady paychecks and careful budgeting were somehow contaminating her superior lifestyle. I opened my mouth to argue, to demand an explanation, to ask where my son was in all of this, but nothing came out. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the new refrigerator hummed its expensive hum, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my house while I was away saving lives at the hospital. Thalia smiled then, the same bright smile I'd grown used to over the past months. "You look exhausted, Estelle. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow we can talk more about the new arrangements." She walked past me toward the hallway, pausing only to add, "Oh, and I moved some of your things from the pantry to make room for my supplies. They're in that box by the back door. You might want to find a place for them in your bedroom or something." I was left alone in my kitchen, staring at two refrigerators, one full of food I couldn't touch, one nearly empty and shoved in the corner like an unwanted relative. The box by the back door contained my coffee, my oatmeal, my modest collection of spices, all the small things that had made this kitchen feel like home. Standing there in the harsh light, surrounded by the evidence of my own displacement, I felt something crack deep inside my chest. Not break. Not yet. But crack, like ice under too much pressure. Something was very, very wrong in my house, and I had the terrible feeling that the second refrigerator was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those white stickers, my yogurt, my butter, my sandwich meat, all marked with Thalia's name like tiny flags claiming conquered territory. By 5:30 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and shuffled to the kitchen to make my usual cup of coffee. That's when I discovered the next change. My coffee maker was gone. Not broken, not packed away. Gone. In its place sat a gleaming espresso machine that looked like it belonged in an Italian cafe. A small placard leaned against it, written in Thalia's neat handwriting. "Please ask before using. Settings are very delicate." I stared at the note, reading it 3 times before the meaning sank in. I needed permission to make coffee in my own kitchen. "Looking for something?" Thalia's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "My coffee maker," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Where is my coffee maker?" "Oh, that old thing? It was taking up so much counter space. I packed it away." She moved past me to her espresso machine, running her fingers along its chrome surface like she was petting a beloved cat. "This is so much better, don't you think? It makes real coffee." real coffee. As opposed to the fake coffee I'd apparently been drinking for the past 3 years. I don't know how to use that, I said quietly. Thalia began pressing buttons with practiced ease. The machine hissed and gurgled, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of expensive coffee beans. It's quite simple once you learn, though the settings really are delicate. One wrong move and you could damage the grinding mechanism. That would be a disaster. This machine cost over $2,000. $2,000 for a coffee maker. I thought of my weekly grocery budget, usually around $100, stretched carefully to cover all my basic needs. Her machine cost 20 weeks of my food money. Where did you put my coffee maker? I asked again. Storage closet in the basement, along with some of your other appliances. She poured herself a perfect cup of coffee, the crema floating on top like something from a magazine advertisement. I had to make room for my kitchen essentials. You understand. My kitchen essentials. I looked around the space that had been mine for 15 years, seeing it now through different eyes. The decorative canisters my sister had given me for my birthday, gone. The small herb garden I'd kept on the windowsill, replaced with some architectural succulent arrangement. Even my kitchen towels had been swapped out for expensive-looking ones in shades of gray and white. Thalia, we need to talk about this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is my house. She paused with the coffee cup halfway to her lips, tilting her head slightly like a confused puppy. Of course it is, Estelle. But we all live here now, don't we? It makes sense to optimize the space for everyone's comfort. Everyone's comfort or just yours? Her smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. I don't know what you mean. Before I could respond, Desmond appeared in the doorway. My 42-year-old son looked rumpled and bleary-eyed, wearing the same wrinkled polo shirt he'd had on yesterday. Morning, Mom? He mumbled, barely making eye contact. Desmond, we need to discuss these changes your wife has been making, I said, gesturing around the transformed kitchen. He glanced nervously at Thalia, who had moved to stand beside him, her free hand resting possessively on his arm. What changes? The refrigerator, the coffee maker, all my things being moved around without discussion. Oh, that. He rubbed his face with his hands, still not quite meeting my gaze. Yeah, Thalia mentioned she was going to organize things better. Makes sense, right? More efficient. Efficient for whom? Thalia stepped forward, her voice taking on that patient, condescending tone I was beginning to hate. Estelle, I know change can be difficult for people your age, but this really is better for everyone. You're working such long hours. When was the last time you had time to cook a proper meal? Or maintain a decent grocery inventory? This way, you don't have to worry about any of that. People your age. The phrase hit like a slap. I was 66, not 96. I'd been managing my own household perfectly well for decades. I don't want you managing my grocery inventory, I said, my voice getting stronger. I want my coffee maker back. I want my things back where they belong. Desmond shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at me. Mom, maybe we could compromise? I mean, if Thalia's willing to handle more of the household stuff, doesn't that make things easier for you? It would, Thalia agreed quickly, if everyone could just be a little more flexible. She moved to the big refrigerator and opened it, revealing shelves packed with expensive food. I've already done all the meal planning for the week. Everything's organized by day and by nutritional requirements. It's actually quite sophisticated. I stared at the color-coded containers, the precisely arranged produce, the rows of bottled water that probably cost more than my monthly phone bill. It was impressive, I had to admit. It was also completely foreign. A kitchen system designed by and for someone who had never worried about the price of groceries. What am I supposed to eat? I asked quietly. Well, you'll need to shop for yourself, obviously, Thalia said. There's still some room in your refrigerator for personal items. Not much, but if you're careful about portions and stick to basics, it should be adequate. Basics. Portions. Like I was a tenant renting space in my own kitchen. I can't afford to buy all my own groceries and pay all the household bills, I said, the admission scraping against my throat. An uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen. Desmond studied his feet, Thalia arranged her already perfect hair. Finally, Thalia spoke, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Estelle, I didn't realize money was such a concern. Maybe it's time to think about adjusting your situation?" "What kind of adjusting?" "Well, you're working such demanding hours at your age. It can't be healthy. Maybe it's time to consider retirement, or at least cutting back to part-time." My heart started pounding. Retirement meant living on Social Security, maybe $1,200 a month if I was lucky. Part-time meant even less. There was no way I could maintain this house, pay utilities, buy food, and cover my medications on that kind of income. "I can't retire," I said. "I need to work." "But if you didn't have to worry about maintaining such a large house," Thalia continued smoothly, "you might find you need less money than you think. There are lovely senior communities where everything's taken care of for you. No cooking, no cleaning, no worries about household management. Senior communities." She was talking about moving me out of my own house. I looked at Desmond, waiting for him to speak up, to defend me, to tell his wife that this was his childhood home and his mother wasn't going anywhere. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should all think about what's best for everyone involved." What's best for everyone involved. Not what was best for me, what was best for everyone. Standing there in my transformed kitchen, surrounded by appliances I wasn't allowed to use and food I wasn't allowed to eat, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The crack that had started the night before widened into something deeper, something that might eventually become dangerous. "I need to get ready for work," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, you're working again today?" Thalia asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "After yesterday's marathon shift? That seems unwise." "Bills don't pay themselves," I said, heading for the hallway. "Actually," Thalia called after me, "I meant to mention, I'd appreciate it if you could use the back entrance when you come home from work. Your uniform shoes are quite loud on the hardwood, and the sound carries to our bedroom. We really need our sleep." I stopped walking but didn't turn around. "Use the back entrance, like a servant, like hired help." "Of course," I said quietly. "I wouldn't want to disturb you." As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the only space in the house that still felt like mine, I could hear them talking in low voices in the kitchen, planning more changes, no doubt, more optimizations, more ways to make my own home more comfortable for everyone except me. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, my hands shaking as I tried to process what was happening. 6 months ago, my son had asked for temporary help. Now his wife was systematically erasing me from my own life, and he was letting her do it. But as I got dressed for another long shift at the hospital, one thought kept circling through my mind. Thalia had made a crucial mistake in all her reorganizing and optimizing and territory claiming. She had forgotten that this house was still in my name, and my name alone. The 3rd week of living under Thalia's new regime had worn me down to nothing. Every morning brought fresh humiliations. My toothbrush moved from the bathroom counter to a drawer, my favorite chair in the living room repositioned to face the wall. Even my mail opened and sorted by someone else's standards. But it was the casual cruelty that hurt most. The way Thalia would ask loudly if I'd remembered to wipe my feet before entering her clean kitchen. The way she'd sigh dramatically whenever I used the wrong entrance or forgot one of her ever-expanding house rules. That Tuesday evening, I came home from another grueling shift to find a note taped to the front door. "Estelle, please use side entrance. Having guests for dinner. Thank you for understanding. T. Guests. In my dining room, using my china, sitting at my grandmother's table." I walked around to the side of the house, my nurse's bag heavy on my shoulder, and let myself in through the laundry room like some kind of unwanted relative. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from the dining room as I climbed the back stairs to my bedroom. Through the banister, I caught glimpses of well-dressed people holding wine glasses, their voices animated and happy. Thalia's friends, no doubt. People who would never know that the woman hosting this elegant dinner party was living rent-free in someone else's home. I closed my bedroom door and sank onto my bed, every muscle in my body screaming from the 12-hour shift. The orthopedic unit had been brutal today. 3 hip replacements, 2 knee surgeries, and an elderly woman who kept crying for her deceased husband. I'd held her hand during the worst of it, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. The laughter from downstairs grew louder. Someone was telling a story about a vacation in Europe, their voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about money. I pressed my pillow over my head, but it didn't help. The sound of my own exclusion seeped through the floorboards like poison. Around 11 o'clock, long after the guests had gone home, I crept downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was dark, except for a thin line of light under Desmond and Thalia's bedroom door. As I passed by on my way to the kitchen, I heard voices, low but urgent. "She's becoming a problem," Thalia was saying. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were talking about me. "She'll adjust," Desmond replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "She just needs more time." Time for what? To accept reality? "Desmond, your mother is 66 years old and working herself into the ground. It's not sustainable. The job market is tough right now. Once I find something steady..." "That's not what I'm talking about." There was a pause, and when Thalia spoke again, her voice was clearer, more focused. "I'm talking about the bigger picture. This house is worth what? 400,000? Maybe more in today's market? 400,000. My breath caught in my throat. I'd had no idea the house had appreciated that much since I'd bought it 15 years ago for 180,000. "I guess," Desmond said uncertainly. "Why? Because your mother is sitting on a gold mine while working herself to death for what? 60,000 a year? 70 at most? Thalia, what are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that we could all be living much better lives if she'd just be reasonable about the situation." My legs felt weak. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, straining to hear every word. "Reasonable how?" "Think about it." Thalia's voice took on that patient, explaining tone I'd grown to hate. "She signs the house over to you, her only son, her natural heir anyway, and we use the equity to set everyone up properly. She could move into one of those nice senior living places, no more worrying about maintenance or property taxes or any of that stress, and we could finally start building the life we deserve, the life they deserve, with my house, my home, my life's work reduced to equity to be cashed in for their convenience." "I don't know," Desmond said slowly. "That seems kind of." "Kind of what? Smart? Practical?" "Desmond, your mother isn't going to live forever. Eventually you'll inherit the house anyway. This way, everyone benefits now, instead of waiting for some tragic accident or illness." Some tragic accident or illness. The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. "She'd never agree to it," Desmond said. "She might, if we approach it right. Frame it as helping her, not helping us. Emphasize how much easier her life would be without all these responsibilities. Hell, we could even find her a place near that hospital where she works. Shorter commute, more time to rest. And if she says no?" There was a long silence. When Thalia finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to the door to hear her. "Then we make her life here uncomfortable enough that moving out starts to look appealing." My blood turned to ice. Make her life uncomfortable enough. All the changes, all the rules, all the casual cruelties, none of it had been about organization or efficiency. It had been a campaign, a systematic effort to drive me out of my own home. "Thalia, I can't ask her to do that," Desmond said, but his protest sounded weak. "You won't have to ask. I've already found the perfect place. Sunset Manor, about 10 minutes from the hospital. Very nice, very clean. I picked up a brochure today." She'd picked up a brochure. She'd been planning this, researching nursing homes for me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a human being with rights and feelings. "How much does a place like that cost?" Desmond asked. "Around $3,000 a month for a basic apartment. But here's the beautiful part. Once we have access to the house equity, we can set up a trust that covers her expenses indefinitely. She'll never have to worry about money again. $3,000 a month. More than double my current housing costs. To live in a tiny apartment surrounded by people waiting to die. And all funded by the sale of my home, my sanctuary, my only real asset in the world. I need to think about this, Desmond said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. The housing market is hot right now, and your mother isn't getting any younger. The longer we wait, the more difficult this becomes. I heard the bed creak as one of them moved. Panicking, I crept quickly back toward the kitchen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it through the walls. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, my hands shaking so badly that water splashed onto the counter. The devastating reality crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't about cleanliness or organization or making the household run more smoothly. This was about money, my house, my life's work being systematically dismantled by two people who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to their financial goals. Every kindness Thalia had shown me over the past months had been calculated. Every smile, every compliment, every moment when I'd thought maybe we were finally bonding, all of it had been part of a plan to get me to trust her enough to sign away everything I'd worked for. And Desmond, my son, who I'd raised alone after his father left, who I'd supported through college and 2 failed business ventures, who I'd welcomed back into my home without question when his life fell apart, he was going along with it, maybe reluctantly, but he was going along with it. I set the glass down on the counter and gripped the edge of the sink, staring out the window into the darkness of my backyard. The garden I'd planted and tended for 15 years was barely visible in the moonlight, but I could see the shape of the rose bushes, the small vegetable patch where I grew tomatoes and herbs. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, everything that made this place home. They wanted to take it all and warehouse me somewhere convenient while they enjoyed the profits. But there was something they didn't know. Something Thalia had missed in all her research and planning. I wasn't just a tired old nurse they could manipulate and discard. I'd been taking care of difficult people for 40 years. I'd dealt with demanding patients, manipulative family members, and doctors who thought they could push me around because I was just a nurse. I'd learned to be strategic, I'd learned to be patient, and I'd learned to fight back when fighting was the only option. Standing in my kitchen, no matter what labels Thalia put on the refrigerator, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion of the past weeks crystallized into something harder, something focused. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who could be frightened into giving up everything she'd worked for. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The water in my glass had gone warm, but I drank it anyway, swallowing it like medicine. Tomorrow, I would start making some changes of my own, changes they weren't expecting. Changes that would remind them exactly whose name was on the deed to this house. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. The lie came easily when I phoned the charge nurse at 6 in the morning. Food poisoning, I said, making my voice weak and apologetic. I'm so sorry for the short notice. Don't worry about it, Estelle. You never call out. Take care of yourself, Nancy replied, and I almost felt guilty for the deception. Almost. But I had more important things to do than feel guilty. While Thalia and Desmond slept peacefully in what they'd begun treating as their master bedroom, I was already dressed and planning my day. I'd heard Thalia telling her friend on the phone that they'd both be out until evening. Some job interview for Desmond followed by lunch with her sister. Perfect. My first stop was downtown, to the law office of Margaret Chen. Maggie and I had been friends since nursing school 45 years ago, back when we were both young and idealistic and thought we could save the world one patient at a time. She'd switched to law after 5 years of nursing, but we'd stayed close. She was the only person I trusted completely, and more importantly, she was the only person who knew my full financial situation. Estelle, this is a surprise, Maggie said, looking up from her desk as her secretary showed me in. At 67, she was a year older than me but looked at least 10 years younger. Money and power were excellent preservatives, apparently. Are you okay? You look. Terrible, I know, I said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. That's actually why I'm here. I told her everything. The refrigerator, the rules, the systematic erosion of my place in my own home. Most importantly, I told her about the conversation I'd overheard the night before. Maggie listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. Jesus, Estelle. This is elder abuse. Textbook psychological manipulation with the clear intent to commit financial fraud. Can they actually do it? Force me to sign over the house? Not legally, no. But they can make your life hell until you give in, which it sounds like they're already doing. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. Tell me about the house. When did you buy it? Is it paid off? Any liens or mortgages? Bought it in 2008 for $180,000. Paid it off completely 3 years ago with money from my retirement account. The memory of that final payment still gave me satisfaction. After decades of rent and mortgages, I'd finally owned something completely. And it's in your name only? Yes. Robert and I were already divorced when I bought it. She scribbled more notes. Current market value? Thalia mentioned $400,000 last night. Is that accurate? Maggie pulled up something on her computer, typing rapidly. $425, actually. Based on recent comparable sales in your neighborhood. Jesus, Estelle. You're sitting on nearly $250,000 in equity. $250,000. No wonder Thalia's eyes had gotten so bright when she talked about the housing market. What are my options? I asked. Several. First, I can draft a formal letter to both of them documenting their behavior and making it clear that any attempt to coerce you into signing over property will result in criminal charges. That sounds like escalation. I'm not ready for war yet. Maggie raised an eyebrow. What are you ready for? I thought about it for a moment, remembering the casual cruelty in Thalia's voice as she'd planned my exile to a nursing home. Information. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with. I can work with that. She made another note. I'll run a complete background check on Thalia. Credit history, employment records, any legal issues. It'll take a few days. What about protecting the house in the meantime? There are several ways to do that. We could set up a trust, add additional security measures to prevent fraudulent transfers. But the simplest solution is also the most effective. She looked at me seriously. You could sell it. My heart stopped. Sell my house? Hear me out. You sell the house, take the equity, and use it to buy something smaller. Maybe a nice condo closer to the hospital. Cash purchase, no mortgage, your name only. They can't manipulate you into signing over something you don't own anymore. The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time, but where would Desmond and Thalia go? That would be their problem to solve, wouldn't it? I sat with that for a moment. My son and his wife, forced to figure out their own housing situation like actual adults. No more free rent. No more subsidized lifestyle. No more treating me like an inconvenience in my own home. I need time to think about it, I said finally. Of course. But Estelle? Maggie's voice was gentle but firm. Whatever you decide, decide quickly. People like this don't stop escalating. They keep pushing until they get what they want, or until someone pushes back harder. My second stop was the bank. I'd been using the same branch of First National for 15 years, and the manager, David Rodriguez, knew me well. When I asked to speak privately about my accounts, he immediately ushered me into his office. Is everything all right, Mrs. Patterson? He asked, closing the door behind us. I need to understand my financial position, I said. All of it. Savings, checking, retirement accounts, the value of my house, everything. He pulled up my accounts on his computer, and we spent the next hour going through each one. The numbers were better than I'd expected. My retirement account had recovered nicely from the market dips of the past few years. My savings account, while modest, was enough to cover several months of expenses. And my checking account showed a pattern I'd never really noticed before. Steady income, minimal expenses. I'd been living so frugally for so long that I'd actually been saving money without realizing it. You're in good shape, Mrs. Patterson, David said finally. Better than a lot of people your age, honestly. You've been very responsible with your money. Responsible, frugal, careful. All the things Thalia thought made me weak actually made me strong. If I wanted to sell my house and buy something smaller with cash, How quickly could that happen? David raised his eyebrows. Are you thinking of downsizing? I'm thinking of taking control of my life. He smiled at that. With the right real estate agent and a motivated buyer, you could close in 30 days. Maybe less if you're flexible on price. 30 days. 1 month to completely upend the life Thalia and Desmond had planned for me. My final stop was the most important one. Heritage Realty was the biggest firm in town, and I'd seen their signs in yards throughout my neighborhood. The receptionist directed me to Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who looked like she could sell ice to Eskimos. Mrs. Patterson, what can I do for you today? I want to sell my house. Quickly and quietly. Sarah's expression sharpened. How quickly? Is 30 days possible? For the right property at the right price, anything's possible. She pulled out a tablet and started asking questions. Address, condition of the house, any recent improvements, timeline for moving out. I'll need to see the property, of course. But based on what you're telling me and the current market conditions, I think we could list it at $410,000 and have offers within a week. $410,000. Even after real estate commissions and closing costs, I'd walk away with close to $375,000. More money than I'd ever had in my life. There's one condition, I said. I need complete discretion until we have a firm offer. No yard signs, no online listings that show the address. No walk-through appointments unless I specifically approve them. Sarah nodded. We can do what's called a pocket listing. Market it through our network of agents and qualified buyers without public advertising. It'll limit the pool of potential buyers somewhat, but in this market, that shouldn't be a problem. And how quickly could I close on a new property? If you're paying cash, 2 weeks, maybe less. I left the real estate office with Sarah's business card and a promise that she'd drive by my house that evening to assess it for listing. My hands were shaking as I got back in my car, but not from fear, from excitement, from possibility, from the intoxicating feeling of taking control after weeks of being controlled. I spent the rest of the afternoon driving around neighborhoods closer to the hospital, looking at condos and small houses with for sale signs. Most were in my price range. Many were in better condition than my current house, and all of them came with one crucial advantage: no unwanted residents who thought they owned the place. By the time I got home at 5 o'clock, I had a plan, not just for selling the house, but for what came after. Where I'd live, how I'd handle the transition, what I'd tell Desmond and Thalia when the time came. They were in the kitchen when I entered through the back door, my assigned entrance. Thalia was cooking something that smelled expensive, and Desmond was sitting at the breakfast bar scrolling through his phone. "Oh, good. You're home," Thalia said without looking up from her pan. "I was worried when you didn't come home last night. I hope you're feeling better." "Much better," I said, and meant it completely. "How was your day?" "Productive," she replied, finally glancing at me. "Desmond had a very promising interview, didn't you, honey?" Desmond looked up from his phone. "Yeah, it went well. Should hear back within a few days." "That's wonderful," I said, setting my purse down on the counter. "It'll be nice for you to get back to work." Something in my tone must have caught Thalia's attention because she paused in her cooking and really looked at me for the first time. "You seem different tonight." "Do I?" I smiled at her, the same bright smile she'd been giving me for months. "I suppose I feel different, refreshed, like I've been reminded of some important things." "What kind of things?" "Oh, just life lessons. The importance of taking control of your own situation, not letting other people make decisions for you." I opened my small refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, noting how pathetically empty it looked compared to Thalia's well-stocked monument to excess. "You know how it is." Thalia's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile remained fixed in place. "Of course." I headed toward the stairs, then paused and turned back. "Oh, Thalia? I appreciate all the organizational changes you've made around here. Very educational." "Educational?" It's been quite enlightening, seeing how easily someone can just take over when the people around them aren't paying attention." I smiled again. Good thing I'm a quick learner. I climbed the stairs to my room, leaving them in the kitchen with whatever expression they were wearing. I didn't need to see their faces to know I'd gotten my point across. Change was coming to this house, but it wouldn't be the change they were expecting. 3 weeks later, I had everything in place. Sarah had been right about the market. We'd received 4 offers within 10 days, all above asking price. I'd accepted an offer of $425,000 from a young couple who could close in 3 weeks. My new condo, a beautiful 2-bedroom unit just 8 minutes from the hospital, was already purchased and ready for occupancy. More importantly, Maggie's background check on Thalia had revealed some fascinating information. 3 previous relationships with older men, all of which had ended with significant financial benefit to her, a pattern of moving in quickly, establishing control, and then manipulating circumstances to her advantage. She wasn't just opportunistic, she was practiced, but none of that would matter if I couldn't get them to reveal their true intentions, which is where my 40 years of dealing with difficult people finally paid off. The trap I set was beautifully simple. It started with a phone call to Desmond on a Thursday morning, while both he and Thalia were out job hunting. I made my voice shaky, older than my years. "Honey, I need to talk to you about something important," I said when he answered. "Could you and Thalia come home? I'm scared." "Scared of what, Mom? Are you okay?" "It's my heart. I've been having episodes at work. The doctor wants to run more tests, but..." I let my voice trail off meaningfully. "But what?" "But I'm worried about what happens if something serious is wrong. I've been thinking about my responsibilities, about this house, about making sure you're taken care of." There was a pause. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "We'll be right there," he said. They arrived within an hour, both wearing matching expressions of concern that might have been genuine if I didn't know better. I'd spent the time preparing for the performance of my life, messing up my hair slightly, making my makeup just a little smeared around the eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" Desmond asked as they settled onto the couch in my living room, the same couch where Thalia had first started rearranging my life. "I've been having chest pains," I said, pressing my hand to my heart for emphasis. "Sharp ones that come out of nowhere. The cardiologist wants me to have a stress test next week and possibly a cardiac catheterization." Thalia leaned forward, her eyes bright with what I recognize now as calculated concern. "Oh, Estelle, that sounds serious." "It could be. And it's made me realize that I need to get my affairs in order." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared. "I've been thinking about what you said, Thalia. About senior communities. About how hard it is for me to maintain this big house." Her breath caught almost imperceptibly. "Have you? I think you were right. I'm getting older, and working these long shifts is taking a toll. Maybe it is time for a change." Desmond shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you don't have to make any big decisions right now. Let's see what the doctors say first." But Thalia wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. "Actually, Desmond, your mother's being very wise. Planning ahead, making sure she's taken care of properly. That's exactly what someone in her position should be doing." I nodded gratefully. "That's what I thought, and I've been looking into some of those places you mentioned. Sunset Manor seems very nice." "It's lovely," Thalia said quickly. "I actually have more information about it if you'd like to see." Of course she did. Probably a complete financial breakdown of how they'd spend my house money. "I'd appreciate that. But there's something I need to discuss with both of you first." I opened my folder and pulled out a document I'd had Maggie prepare. An official-looking form that was actually meaningless, but would serve my purposes perfectly. "What is it?" Desmond asked. "It's a preliminary estate planning document. If I'm going to move into senior living, I need to make sure this house is properly transferred, for tax purposes and estate planning." Thalia's eyes locked onto the paper like a hawk spotting prey. The lawyer explained that I could transfer ownership now while I'm alive and avoid probate issues later. It would be much cleaner than waiting until... I let the implication hang in the air. "Mom, you don't need to think about that stuff," Desmond said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," Thalia interrupted, "that's very smart planning. A lot of people don't realize how complicated estate issues can become. This way, everything's clear and legal." She was practically salivating. I had to suppress a smile. The thing is, I continued, I'd need someone I trust to take over the property. Someone who could handle the responsibilities, maybe even help with some of the transition costs. Of course, Thalia said immediately. We'd be honored to help however we can. You would? I made my voice tremulous with gratitude. Even though it would mean taking on the property taxes and insurance and maintenance, that's such a financial responsibility. We can handle it, Thalia said firmly, shooting Desmond a warning look when he started to speak. And you wouldn't mind if I stayed in the house for a little while longer? Just until I find the right senior community and get settled? Naturally, Thalia said. You'd be welcome to stay as long as you need. Welcome to stay. In my own house. The audacity was breathtaking. There's just one thing, I said, pretending to study the document. The lawyer mentioned something about a preliminary transfer process, something to make sure everything's legal and binding before we finalize the arrangements. Both of them leaned forward. What kind of process? Thalia asked. Well, I'd need to sign a letter of intent, stating my plans to transfer the property. And you'd both need to sign acknowledgement forms, confirming your willingness to accept the responsibility. I pulled out 2 more papers Maggie had prepared, these ones very real and very legally binding. What exactly would we be acknowledging? Desmond asked, some instinct for self-preservation finally kicking in. Just that you understand the full scope of what you're agreeing to take on. The property taxes, about $4,000 a year. The insurance, another $1,800 annually. Maintenance and repairs, which average about $3,000 a year for a house this age. Utilities when I'm not here to cover them. I watched Thalia's face as the numbers sank in. Nearly $9,000 a year in carrying costs, not counting mortgage payments they didn't know didn't exist. Of course, she said smoothly. Once the property transfer is complete, we'd have access to the equity to cover those expenses. Oh no, I said, shaking my head sadly. That's not how it works. The equity stays locked up until I actually move out and we sell the house. This preliminary transfer is just to establish legal responsibility. Very common in estate planning, according to the lawyer. The light in Thalia's eyes dimmed slightly. How long would that arrangement last? Well, that depends on how long it takes me to find the right place and arrange my affairs. Could be 6 months, could be a year. Maybe longer if my health situation becomes complicated. A year of carrying costs with no access to equity. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if the eventual payoff was worth the upfront investment. I understand this is a lot to ask, I continued. Maybe I should look into other options. Perhaps one of my colleagues from the hospital would be interested in a rent-to-own arrangement. No, Thalia said quickly. We want to help, don't we, Desmond? My son looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, but he nodded. Of course, Mom, if that's what you want. You're both so kind, I said, reaching for a pen. Should we make this official then? I signed my name to the meaningless letter of intent with a flourish, then handed the pen to Thalia. She signed her acknowledgement form without reading it carefully, a mistake that would cost her dearly. Desmond signed his more reluctantly, but he signed it. There, I said, collecting all the papers and putting them back in my folder. Now I feel so much better knowing everything's arranged properly. When do you think you'll start looking at places seriously? Thalia asked. Oh, I already have. In fact, I have an appointment this weekend to tour a few facilities. Very exclusive places, the kind where you have to be on a waiting list. Her smile was triumphant. That's wonderful, Estelle. I'm so proud of you for taking this step. After they left the room, presumably to celebrate their victory in private, I sat alone in my living room and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The documents they'd signed weren't meaningless after all. They were legal acknowledgments of financial responsibility for my property, binding them to cover all carrying costs regardless of whether they actually owned the house. More importantly, I'd recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Every greedy word, every manipulative suggestion, every moment where they'd revealed their true intentions. Maggie had assured me it would be admissible in court if things escalated that far, but I didn't think it would come to that, because tomorrow, they'd discover that the house they thought they were inheriting had already been sold. That the woman they'd been manipulating and controlling had outmaneuvered them completely, and that the financial responsibility they'd just legally accepted was for a property they'd never own. The closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. By noon, Desmond and Thalia would learn that their perfect plan had one fatal flaw. They'd underestimated the woman they were trying to cheat. I'd spent weeks being treated like a burden, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to their happiness. Tomorrow, they'd discover what happened when you tried to con someone who'd spent 4 decades learning how to read people's true intentions. I went to bed that night with the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning they'd never seen coming. The closing went smoothly. By 10:30 Friday morning, I had a cashier's check for $378,000 tucked safely in my purse, and the young couple who'd bought my house had their keys. They'd been thrilled with the quick sale, and the fact that the property came with no complications, no liens, no disputes, no angry family members with claims on the equity. I drove home slowly, savoring what I knew would be my last trip down these familiar streets as a resident. The house looked the same from the outside, modest but well-maintained, with the garden I'd tended for 15 years still blooming despite everything that had happened inside. Desmond's car was in the driveway, but Thalia's wasn't. Perfect. I'd rather do this with just my son anyway. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast bar with his laptop open, probably applying for more jobs. He looked up when I entered, and I was struck by how much older he seemed than his 42 years. When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? "Hey, Mom, how'd the doctor appointment go?" I'd forgotten about my fictional cardiac consultation. "Fine. Just routine tests. Good." He turned back to his computer. "Thalia's out looking at furniture for when when the house situation gets settled. Furniture for my house, the house I'd just sold out from under them." I sat down across from him, setting my purse carefully on the counter. "Desmond, we need to talk." Something in my tone made him look up. "What about?" "About the house. About what you and Thalia have been planning." His face went carefully blank. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I pulled my phone from my purse and set it on the counter between us. "I heard you talking that night 3 weeks ago, about making my life uncomfortable enough that I'd want to move out, about cashing in on the equity, about warehousing me in some nursing home while you two enjoyed the profits." The color drained from his face. "Mom, I recorded our conversation yesterday too. The one where you both signed legal documents accepting financial responsibility for this property." "You recorded us?" His voice cracked slightly. "I've been recording everything for the past month. Every cruel comment from Thalia. Every time she treated me like a servant in my own home. Every conversation where you let her get away with it." Desmond stared at the phone like it might bite him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And what I discovered is that my own son was willing to manipulate and defraud his mother for money." "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "We weren't trying to hurt you. We just thought—" "You thought what?" "That I was too old and stupid to notice what you were doing. That I'd just quietly sign over my life's work and fade away." He flinched. "We thought we were helping." "Helping yourselves." The front door opened and Thalia's voice rang through the house. "I'm back. Wait until you see the beautiful dining set I found. It'll be perfect once we—" She stopped in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. "What's going on?" "I was just explaining to Desmond that I know about your plan," I said calmly. Thalia's expression shifted instantly from confusion to cold calculation. "What plan?" "The one where you manipulate me into signing over my house so you can sell it and use the money to fund your lifestyle while I waste away in some nursing home." "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because I have recordings that say otherwise." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thalia moved to stand behind Desmond, her hands gripping the back of his chair. "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "you already agreed to transfer the house. You signed the papers yesterday." I smiled then, the same bright smile she'd been giving me for months. "Actually, I didn't." "What do you mean?" "I mean the papers you signed were real legal documents. Mine was just a piece of paper my lawyer created to see what you'd do. You're both legally obligated to cover the carrying costs of this property for the next year, regardless of whether you own it. Desmond looked confused. But you said you were transferring. I lied, just like you've been lying to me for months. Thalia's grip on the chair tightened. You can't do this. We had an agreement. No. We had a conversation where you revealed your true intentions, and I pretended to go along with it. I stood up, slinging my purse over my shoulder. The same way you've been pretending to care about my well-being while systematically trying to steal everything I own. Where are you going? Desmond asked. To my new home. The condo I bought with the money from selling this house. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched understanding dawn on their faces. First confusion, then disbelief, then growing horror as they realized what I'd done. You sold the house? Thalia whispered. Closed this morning. $378,000 cash in hand. But we signed those documents. We're responsible for the taxes and insurance and maintenance and utilities, I finished. Yes, you are. For the next year, you're legally obligated to cover all carrying costs for a property you'll never own. I hope you saved some money because it's going to cost you about $9,000 over the next 12 months. Desmond looked like he might be sick. Mom, you can't do this to us. I can't do what? Treat you the way you've been treating me? Use you for my own financial gain? Make you feel unwelcome in your own home? This was our home too, Thalia said, her voice rising. No, it was my home. You were guests who systematically tried to steal from me, manipulate me, and drive me out of my own life. I headed toward the hallway, then turned back for one final look at them. Desmond sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. Thalia stood rigid behind him, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. The new owners take possession on Monday, I said. You have the weekend to find somewhere else to live. Where are we supposed to go? Desmond asked without looking up. That's not my problem anymore. You're adults. Figure it out. I walked to the front door, then paused with my hand on the knob. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see them both, my son and the woman who'd tried to destroy me, facing the consequences of their own greed and cruelty. A part of me felt sorry for Desmond. He'd always been weak, always taken the path of least resistance. Thalia had seen that weakness and exploited it, turning him against his own mother for the promise of easy money. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. They'd made their choices. Now they could live with them. I opened the door and stepped out into the bright morning sun. My new condo was waiting. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, a balcony overlooking the city where I'd worked and lived and built my life. No unwanted residents, no one to answer to, no one who could take away what I'd earned. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway watching me go. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. How did it go? I pulled over and typed back, perfect. They never saw it coming. And how do you feel? I sat in my car, thinking about that question. How did I feel? Not guilty. They'd brought this on themselves. Not sad. I'd grieved the loss of my son months ago when I realized what kind of man he'd become. Not angry. Anger was exhausting, and I was finally free of it. What I felt was something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. I typed back, free. The condo was everything the pictures had promised, and more. Bright, clean, modern, without being sterile. The kitchen had granite counters and stainless steel appliances that belonged to me and only me. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom with a soaking tub. The second bedroom would make a perfect home office. But the best part was the silence. No footsteps overhead, no voices making cruel jokes, no feeling of being unwelcome in my own space. Just quiet, blessed solitude. I made myself a cup of coffee. Real coffee, from my old coffee maker that I'd rescued from the basement storage room, and sat on my new balcony looking out over the city. Somewhere down there, Desmond and Thalia were probably having the fight of their lives, trying to figure out how to salvage their shattered plans. It wasn't my problem anymore. My phone rang around noon. Desmond's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. There has to be some way to work things out." I deleted the message without responding. An hour later, Thalia called. Her voicemail was less conciliatory. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But this isn't over, Estelle. You can't just abandon your family and think there won't be consequences." I blocked her number. That evening, as I unpacked the last of my boxes in my new home, I found the photo album I'd put together months ago, the one documenting Desmond's childhood, all the times I'd been there for him, all the sacrifices I'd made to give him a good life. I flipped through the pages one last time, looking at pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, school plays and baseball games. The little boy in those photos bore no resemblance to the man who'd tried to steal my home. I closed the album and put it in the back of my bedroom closet. Some chapters in life were meant to stay closed. 6 months later, I was settling into my new routine beautifully. Work was less stressful with the shorter commute, and I'd even started taking some of the optional training classes I'd never had time for before. My savings account was growing steadily without the burden of supporting 2 additional adults. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Desmond and Thalia had moved in with her parents temporarily, then later rented a small apartment across town. Their relationship had apparently suffered under the strain of their failed scheme. Turns out that couples united primarily by greed don't handle disappointment well. Desmond had found work eventually, but at a much lower salary than he'd expected. Thalia had discovered that the job market wasn't particularly welcoming to someone whose primary qualification was manipulating elderly people. I felt nothing when I heard these updates. No satisfaction, no pity, no regret. They were strangers to me now, people whose names I recognized but whose lives no longer intersected with mine. That was exactly how I wanted it. On my 67th birthday, I treated myself to something I'd never done before. A weekend trip to the coast just because I could. I sat on the beach watching the sunset, listening to the waves, feeling the salt air on my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't taking care of anyone but myself. I wasn't worrying about anyone else's problems or needs or demands. I was just a woman sitting on a beach, watching the end of another day, knowing that tomorrow would bring whatever it brought and I'd handle it on my own terms. It was the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.